You're listening to Breaking the Fifth Wall, part of the TCD Podcast Network.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome in to episode 2 of Breaking the Fifth Wall, the number one podcast for content, because that's more of what you need. Content in your life, right? You're not overloaded already with content and things that keep flying into your podcast feeds and into your Google readers or whatever you're using for your RSS feeds and your Twitter time. I don't know. I could keep going on forever because there's a million different types of content. Hey, thanks for joining us on this episode 2. Like I said, it's quite cool to be able to interview people. And obviously, if you joined us in episode 1, you heard my interview with Mike from Bay Hope Church talking about worship and content. If you missed that, you can actually head back into the podcast feed. Pretty soon, we're actually going to start putting these up on the YouTubes. So stay tuned for that. All that information will be in the show notes, and we'll be tweeting and taking care of all of that with the Church Digital. And speaking of the Church Digital, if you haven't checked out the website and kind of everything that's been going on over there, I highly suggest you pop over to thechurch.digital as soon as you can. Obviously, keep listening to this podcast. If you're on your phone or on your laptop, you can multitask because you are so talented. Head over to thechurch.digital and check out everything that's going on, especially with Sprout Digital's 67-page research report on digital churches. I'm actually clicking on it as we speak, and it is fantastic. It's got a ton of stuff from a ton of digital pastors out there, a ton of church leaders. That it's 67 pages, of course, and it's really kind of a state of the union of what the digital church looks like. And not only the digital church, but the metaverse church, the phygital church, and kind of the state of digital church planting, something that we're sort of really passionate about at the Church Digital. And we're here to help you. We're here to help your church. We're here to obviously bring content into your life, again, because that's more of what you need. But we're also offering courses and really some one-to-one coaching and some consulting work that is really going to help you with establishing your digital ministry, keeping it afloat, really creating engagement with your people, and most importantly, fulfilling the Great Commission, because that's what we exist for. And as part of the Church Digital, we are now starting the Digital Church Network, which is this idea that was birthed by Jeff Reed a couple of years ago and has really started to pick up the pace. And I'm clicking on it right now. You can actually head over to digitalchurch.network or just click the link on the church.digital and join the network. We've got a lot going on. We were in our Slack a little bit earlier today talking about some live shows that are going to be rolling out on one of our platforms called Altar Live, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to getting you in community with us. But enough about that. You're tired of hearing me yak. Actually, I want to introduce you in this episode to an incredible pastor that I had the chance to meet a couple of months ago for an interview I was doing with another podcast that I was doing. And this guy and his wife and his team around him started a church solely for gamers, really, on Twitch. His name's Mark, and he formed Lux Digital Church. And I'm excited to get you in the fold with him and his team and to see what they're doing. It's something that I'm super passionate about, kind of allowing gamers and the gamer subculture, of which I am a part of because I am a gamer nerd. I'm really super excited to see ministry happening in that field, and Mark and his team are doing an incredible job, and I really wanted to bring you this episode and kind of bring you on the journey a little bit of how they got started, what they're doing in terms of preparation and content, and most importantly, the why behind what they're doing and who they're really trying to reach. So with all of that being said, here is my interview with Mark. Well, Mark from Lux, it is so good to have you here on Breaking the Fifth Wall, man. Thanks so much for joining us here on the show today.
Andy, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. And it's always good to have an opportunity to talk about what I'm passionate about. So
absolutely. So Before we get to what you're doing with Lux, back us up, back the entire audience up. Who are you? Kind of family origin structure. Give me your origin story, as I like to tell everybody.
Sure. I mean, the origin story of like me in ministry, or the origins like pre-Lux, or like the origin story of how we came to do kind of like what we're doing right now.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So I'm born and raised in Western PA, just north of Pittsburgh. I've been part of the church pretty much my whole life. Went to Reformed Presbyterian school, studied youth ministry, took a gig working part-time as a youth and children's director for a non-denominational church in a small town of about 1,200 people north of Pittsburgh. I worked there as the youth pastor, and then for 6 years, and then in the same church as the head of discipleship, assimilation, and care for adult ministry for additional 5 years. So my ministry, denominationally, I'm a mutt, but in terms of full-time ministry, I've only, like, post-college, I've only ever had one job before Lux. I worked for the same church for 11 years, kind of rare for a millennial. But I just landed in a really, really good church. Like, I just happened to land in a really supportive, really awesome church that gave me room to grow and expand and stuff. And was literally, I was just sharing this with another online church today, actually. And I was just saying, I came into that place as a 22-year-old, with a lip ring and tattoos. And I walked out, theologically more sound. And I, with a wife and 2 kids and a house and, a decade of ministry experience under my belt in a wide variety of circumstances. When I started, we met in a school, and we were packing up every day. We rented a little house on Main Street of our town to do youth ministry. And we had 8 kids. And when we left, we had 120 plus kids in youth ministry. We had grown from a couple hundred people to almost 1,000 in our small town.
Wow.
And built 2 beautiful, $1 million plus, $2 million plus church buildings. So got the honor to be part of several building projects, hired, 3 of my close friends as the youth pastor, executive pastor, and children's pastor to come work for us there. And my wife and I still attend that church on the weekends. The lead pastor of that church is mainly like our theological covering for what we're doing now. And then in 2019, through a podcast, God began to work on our hearts. And I can get into more detail. I don't really need to get into all of it, but realistically, pre-COVID, God began to move us in the direction of breaking our heart for people in the gaming community, a group that I love and I've always, I've been a part of throughout pretty much my whole life in varying degrees. And just really broke my heart for people who are looking for truth, searching for hope. And there really wasn't anybody out there offering them a whole lot more than sort of this, I don't know. I don't even know what to call it, but there's this real strong mentality inside of that culture to sort of pick and choose what you want from all various religions and beliefs and ideologies and piece them together and you just kind of become master of your own universe, right? In many ways, you become a god. And we're just like, wow, these people really need a church. And they're never showing up to church, right? So if we don't bring the church to them, they're never coming. And we can get into sort of some of the theology or ecclesiology of that. But basically in 2020, we decided to start a church. And that was right before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit. And we went from trying to launch in 2023 or 2024 to being like, well, maybe we change I was in seminary. Like, maybe we change what my seminary degree is, wrap this sucker up quick. And let's, like, if there's someone who's going to write a check to support an online church, it's right now. So it's one of those strike when the iron's hot type of things, but God has really blessed it. So we launched Lux after working with Stadia Church Planting and Our Sending Church and a bunch of other organizations. We launched Lux in March of 2021. So we're celebrating, as of this recording, I don't know when this will go live, but we're about a month out, about maybe 5 weeks out from our 1-year anniversary as an entirely online church,
Your sending church was okay with you guys starting Lux? They were supportive and everything behind the scenes?
Yeah, so there was a lot of conversations there with our sending church at first. I recently met with a pastor, a year ago, and he said there's something that happens when you turn 30, between 30 and 33, where God, if you look in the Bible, it's pretty true. God did something in Jesus' life in his early 30s. He did something in Joseph's life in his early 30s. There's something that happens where God moves you. And so I think with my sending church, it was one of those things where it was like, I was ready to lead. And the space wasn't there at the time. And so I was just, and I think if I had maybe listened to God earlier, maybe we would have done something sooner. I'm not sure. But there was a point in which like it was sad, and we love our church and we're so glad. There was a mutual blessing, I think, in both the sending and in the releasing there, that, it was just clear through a wide variety of circumstances that God was leading us to do something. We just didn't know what that thing was. And when there's a sending and a pulling, it makes that transition a lot easier. Our church, the church I came from, has always been, pretty open to innovative ideas. So they liked the idea, and they were actually open to it being sort of part of them. But it became clear to me that I wasn't really interested in leading an online venue or an online campus for an established church. We were called to a gaming community, and our church wasn't, right? And so it was going to be very difficult. So we ended up we are part of their network, but we're not under their umbrella. So we are our own separate entity, but it was a big blessing. They sent us out, commissioned us, prayed over us. We're still a part of that church. We're still friends with many of the staff members and the members of that church. They're major parts of our lives, because unlike every other church planner that typically moves towns and changes all their relationships, I didn't go anywhere. I still live 3 miles from the church I worked at for 11 years. So I'm in the community. My next door neighbor was my accountability partner and a youth leader at the church, and he's still my next door neighbor and my accountability partner. So, some of those things, just didn't change. So it was just easier for us to stay at the same church on Sunday mornings, even though we're leading a completely different church throughout the week.
So you started talking very briefly about, you said through a podcast, God started changing your heart and your mind. Talk me through that process. And I guess the bigger question then is, how was your wife with all this entire kind of start into what you're doing right now?
Oh, man, there's so many parts of this last year that have been so beautiful and so awesome. And there are so many parts that have been so painful. And so
like what? Name them. Let's list them. Let's go.
I think that we had really believed that we wanted to be part of the team that we were on for 30 years. The church that I came from, the senior pastor who's on our board is retiring in the next couple of years. They just made that public announcement. Wow. One of my best friends who I hired there is lined up to be the next lead pastor. And that probably should have been me, like at one point, or it could have been me. And so for us to go through this transition as that church is going through that transition has been hard on my wife and me, because it's a lot of like, well, God, why didn't you let us do that? Like, that's what we wanted to do. But when you decide that Jesus is Lord of your life, you don't get to have preferences anymore.
Yep.
So
amen to that.
So the podcast started in 2019. I just picked up a microphone and I had done some podcasting for leadership and covering video games before. So I enjoyed it. It was like my discipleship pastor position wasn't very creative. It was a lot of managing people, and it was like tedious and boring and frustrating for me. And so as someone who's has this bent to build things, but also has a creative bent to him, I just wasn't able to exert that in any way. So I started with podcasting, simple prayer: God, take my love for gaming and use it, redeem it in some capacity. And so I just started asking people who came on the show, and I was covering like an obscure digital card game, video game at the time. And I just started asking if I could pray for these streamers and podcasters and YouTubers, and they let me. And then God started answering those prayers. And I started offering at the end of the show closing thoughts. And I was just dispensing biblical wisdom from the book of Proverbs without people knowing it. And we started getting reviews and people joining our community saying, the best part of this show is closing thoughts. Wow. And then, so we started saying, hey, at the end of the show, I'm a pastor in addition to doing this podcast. If you need someone to listen to you, I'm willing to listen to you. And then we started having people from all over the globe come out and say, I'm in a really dark place. I'm going through a divorce. I'm having a kid. I am going through a breakup. I'm depressed, whatever. And I would meet with them and pray with them. And then God started answering those prayers. And we were reading a book by Henry Blackaby at the time. Yep. And I love doing that, by the way, because it gives all the people who listen to the podcast, and they're like, I don't like digital church. And then like this guy is a new age liberal or something, right? And then you're like, and then you mention Henry Blackaby, and they're like, hold the phone, I like Henry Blackaby. It's like,
by Jove,
this young man is reading Henry Blackaby. And so I don't want to mock anybody, but seriously, that's the reaction I get. And in Experiencing God by Blackaby, he says, don't just do things and ask God to bless them, but look and see what God is doing and partner with him.
Yep.
And God was answering more of my prayers for this online community full of atheists than he was the prayers that I was praying for my church. Wow. And so I was like, he's at work here. I'm okay. I like, this seems cool. I'll do this. Keeping in mind at the time, I wasn't online. Like, I played video games to escape people, not to make friends. Yeah. And so like I would go to work and just be emotionally exhausted as a pastor, going into hospital rooms and stuff. And then I would come home and, I'd kill people on the internet just so that I didn't have to talk to people.
Yeah.
And, I was off the grid. I didn't have social media for 5 years before I started Lux. So, it really wasn't my bag. I was always the house church person. I didn't stream. It wasn't really my thing. But God had just sort of moved my heart in that direction with this community. We experienced Discord for the first time. An atheist reached out to me and asked if they could create a Discord server for our community. I began to realize that there are more people who they don't just use the internet as a tool, they live part of their lives there than I knew. Yep. And I started building these deep, deep transformative relationships with people that I truthfully thought wasn't possible. Like I was the type of person who would come in and say, God's plan A is the local church and God doesn't make plan Bs. and I said that many times throughout my ministry. and then I ate those words because my local church was suddenly spread all across the globe. And I was like, I would meet with people and I would pray and I'd watch the Holy Spirit hit them 3,000 miles away from me. And I was like, well, if God is omnipresent and his spirit is omnipresent, the internet is the closest thing that I get to experiencing that, to know what omnipresence feels like. Yeah. And so I was like, well, I can be present with these people. If the Holy Spirit's willing to fall in Turkey while I'm sitting in Pennsylvania and praying for somebody, then I can do this. Like we can disciple people. The Holy Spirit's at work. We can build community. Lives can be transformed. These are all okay, we can do church. And so then the dream really broke out to start a church, which I thought was heretical at first. And God really dealt with me over the course of about 6 weeks, walking me through scriptures as I took our dog for a walk and helped me to realize that maybe it wasn't as heretical as I thought it was. And maybe my view of the church had a lot more to do with what made me comfortable than what the church actually was.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing you said there, and I kind of want to back up real quick as we lead into the next question, sort of a weird paradoxical thing, but you talked about older, kind of the conservative, quote unquote, church leaders looking at you reading the Blackaby book and saying, well, experiencing God's not for you, you liberal, whatever, young person, yada, yada. I went through the same thing. And then I was a worship pastor for about 10 years. And then right in the midst of that, was reading Experiencing God and felt God push me to go start a gym, a nonprofit faith-based gym, like a CrossFit gym in my community. And we started it and we ran it for like 2 years and it was still going up until I passed it off to somebody and got back into worship leading. And COVID killed the gym because COVID killed lots of gyms, but it would have still been running today because we were simply partnering with what God was doing. So the question I want to ask is, in terms of what you're doing now on the internet, it's not 3 songs and a message that you're streaming via YouTube or via Facebook or whatever, because whenever we think online church, now we think, okay, well, it's just a window into what people are doing in the building. Talk me through what you guys are actually doing in terms of content creation, in terms of quote unquote service structure, fellowship, everything around your church.
So I think the difference is intentionality and focus. So a lot of what we're doing looks similar to a church, but our intentionality and our focus is different. So I don't have an in-person people. So the online audience are not second class to me.
Yep.
They are my church.
Let's go.
Let's preach. I treat them as such. we have this really unhealthy view of the internet inside the church, where we view someone's number and screen name and we devalue them and dehumanize them and refuse to recognize them as a person with a spiritual journey and a story.
100%.
And I refuse to stop at screen names and profile pictures, because every screen name and profile picture represents somebody who has a genuine story, who's growing in some capacity spiritually or dying spiritually, and they have needs. Like, they're real people. And I was just like, no, I'm going to figure out who these people are. I'm going to get to know their stories, and I'm going to figure out who they are. I'm not going to stop at keyboard warrior. I'm not going to stop at just, throwing tweets back and forth at people. And service isn't just going to be a broadcast. So our church looks different in that capacity. A lot of the typical things that you would see part of a church: prayer, preaching, worship, the Lord's Supper, the sacraments, right? Giving. Those things are part of our experience as a church. By the way, our church is on Wednesday nights. So if you want to come and experience it, we're live every Wednesday night at Twitch, twitch.tv/Lux Digital Church, 8:30 p.m. EST. So if you want to come and actually experience it for yourself, you can. But like in the beginning, the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes of our live service, it's just me and my wife sitting on the couch talking to our church, and they're typing to us and we're talking to them. We have a question of the day. We're going over announcements, but it's a lot more laid back, and we're just sort of hanging out with people. Right. And it's usually pretty humorous. Like, we're cracking jokes. There's a lot of laughing. And it was kind of like, yeah, if I knew that there was going to be a pretty good comedy sketch at the beginning of every church service I went to, I'd probably be more prone to go to church as well. But we just have fun with them, and we're very transparent. One of our cultural values is authenticity is greater than image. And so we're just very transparent. And then we kick things over and we have a worship song. And worship looks different for us. It does. But we believe that worship is the opportunity to prepare our hearts to receive the most from the word of God and the preaching that we can. So it doesn't look like an upbeat song, a kind of upbeat song, and then a somber song. It brings about reverence. A lot of that is just they're reflective. And we ask people to bring up prayer concerns during it. Then we go through a time of prayer where we have someone who prays for every prayer concern that comes into our church. So we believe one of the most important things that we can be doing as a church is praying for one another. And then I teach. And that teaching usually lasts, 20 to 40 minutes, usually 35. And it's going to look a lot like teaching, except I'm interacting with the church. There are people who are asking questions. I'm literally answering those questions. Like, if someone raised their hand during your service and you took questions, I can do that. And then afterwards, we do a post-service experience where I'm back on the couch by myself. We do AMA, Ask Me Anything. And I just answer questions. So last night, I preached on one of our core values last night. Rhythm is greater than religion. And afterwards, I spent 15 minutes answering questions about gap theory and creation. Nice. Because the church was just asking questions about it, and I just answered questions. So that's what our normal service looks like. I think a lot of people who come from physical church mindset have a hard time grasping that because they've never seen it, right? But if you're part of Twitch culture, you see it every single day.
Yep.
At any given time, the most popular category on Twitch, just as a heads up, Twitch is a website owned by Amazon, owns about 70% of the live streaming on the internet. There's about 100 million unique viewers on Twitch every month, about 3.5 million unique broadcasters every month. It's a big thing. It's not a small thing. There's a lot of streamers who stream 40 hours a week to 20 to 30,000 people a day. This is their living. Lots of people who stream to smaller numbers. This is their living. And there's many people who go there looking for truth. And the biggest category on Twitch is not video games. It's just chatting. So just chatting sees anywhere from 300 to 600,000 active viewers at any given moment, 24/7. And that's the category we're in. That's almost always the biggest category unless there's a big esports event going on. So that's where people are. They're actually not even going to watch video game content. A lot of them are going just to connect with people. So we're doing the same thing. We always say that Twitch is our sanctuary and Discord is everything else. So if you think of your worship center, that's Twitch for us. Discord is our Sunday school rooms. It's our bulletin board. It's our welcome center. It's our prayer rooms. It's our small group rooms. It's our team meetings. Everything else happens over in Discord. That's where we're hanging out. We're posting devotionals over there. Our Bible studies are going through there. All of that stuff, the typical rhythms of the church and the spiritual disciplines are happening a lot in communities happening through Discord.
Do you feel that the ground is more fertile because you are speaking the lingua franca, the language of the culture at that point? by, you and I have talked about this before, but you're using an SM7B and you've got board games in the background and you come from gaming culture and you look like a streamer. Do you feel, I mean, you are a streamer, but you've got the look, you've got the camera angle, you've got the everything. Do you feel like the ground is more fertile to have conversations about faith, or are you finding a lot of pushback from, internet trolls, for lack of a better term?
We don't get a lot of trolls. We're not big enough for that. If you ask somebody else, maybe, but I don't get a tremendous amount of that. Is the ground fertile? Yes. But is it hard to till? Yes. It's like here is a really dry patch of ground that hasn't been worked like ever. And there is enormous fertility. Like there's so much there that can be nourished and grow. There's so many people so hungry, but it's also wildly hard work, right? Mm-hmm. And so you don't walk in, there's nobody in our church that comes to faith and they're like, oh yeah, I know what the church believes. Like, I come from Reformed background, right? So theologically, I'm like, 80%, 70% Reformed in my theology. I'm conservative in my theology. And so, everything in terms of interacting with LGBTQ community, how we do all of these things, like we're going to hold to a lot of very typical, what you could see as conservative Christian principles and values. And so, but I don't have anybody who comes to my church who doesn't know about church and comes to faith who assumes those things. So like you have people who come to faith and their beliefs are wild, just crazy. And you have to work through that with them. Right. And it's a process. It's like people don't come to you with a preconceived understanding of what the church is. Where in the physical church, a lot of times the people who came to us, they were just coming from another church.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they were partially discipled since kids for us. And so you're like, oh yeah, you're here. Welcome. Come to our new members class. Let's get you plugged in. And it's like, nah, like you can't do that here. Like the people that we're encountering haven't been to church in 10 years at best, a lot of times, And so it's just different.
When you are creating sermons, post-show wrap-up, pre-service type stuff, this is a question I always ask everybody, but what's the why behind it? Like, do you have an ideal person in mind, or ideal 3 people that you're looking at the camera or talking to, or is it just kind of take what the Lord is giving you on your heart for that week and let's expound upon it?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we have a Saddleback Sam. Everyone likes having a Saddleback Sam. Ours doesn't have a name. Ours is a 27-year-old male gamer working a dead-end job. He doesn't necessarily believe in a whole lot of anything. He's not happy with his life, but he comes home, he jumps on Discord, he plays games with his friends every night. He goes to bed at night feeling like he's wasted another evening, but he can't really drum up the energy or the ambition to change anything about who he is or what he's doing. But what they always say is like, we have a one, but we do everything in our power to be faithful with every person that God sends us. So we have that, but we also have Janny, who's in her 60s and doesn't play any games. We also have John, who plays games. He's a 63-year-old retired police officer from Australia. Like we also have Mackenzie, whose husband is a gamer, but she's one of our team leaders, and she doesn't game at all. And she's just finishing up her doctoral work right now. So you have a one, but you're faithful with whoever God sends you. So yeah, we have people in mind and we funnel it through both of our values, but we also realize that our one is a multifaceted person. And I think people think of gamers and that's all they do. Like, you game, that's all that you do. Your whole life is gaming. And that's not true. Like gamers have a spiritual life as well. Gamers have jobs as well. Gamers have relationships as well. The average hardcore gamer is in their 30s right now. So we have kids. For goodness sakes, like we're a hardcore gamer, but we also have kids. People think that all that you're reaching is 15-year-olds. The vast majority of our church is probably 27 to 32. And so, that's not the type of person that we're reaching. We're reaching the millennials that left your church 10 years ago. And the Gen Z that never showed up.
Right. And
are never showing up, literally never. And I think one of the confusing things, like the physical church becomes threatened by the digital church's presence sometimes. But the thing is that like the digital church can reach a person that the physical church can't. And it doesn't it doesn't mean that like we should compete with one another. It means that there are people within driving distance of amazing, faithful, beautiful churches who are passionately following Jesus and preaching the truth all across the globe that will never show up at your church. Just never coming. Doesn't matter how comfy the seats or anything. And you're never going to meet them, right? You're probably never going to meet them. But we can through the screen that's in front of their faces, you know, some of them 6-8 hours a day.
Yeah, 100%.
And so, you know, it's not that we're pulling people from the bride of Christ. We're bringing people into the bride of Christ that never would have stepped foot through a brick and mortar building.
Have you gotten pushback from quote unquote brick and mortar churches or even online churches? Any pushback saying you guys are taking butts and seats and nickels and noses from us?
It's not so much nickels and noses and butts and seats. They are like the physical church is like reeling from the fact that, you know, 40% of their people have come back post-COVID anyway.
Oh yeah.
They're too focused on that right now, which I get. It's more pushback of like, during COVID, I had to live stream and I hated it. So it sucks and no one should do it. It's not so much like, it's just like, you know, I literally had, so one of my main team members is a youth pastor at a Southern Baptist church in Tennessee, and he serves with us as a small group leader. And he got into an argument on Twitter. A guy said, if you want young adult males to quit playing video games, go pick them up and go on an adventure. And he responded by saying, which isn't a bad idea. It was like, fine. I mean, most of them don't want to go on an adventure, but that's fine. And he responded by saying like, well, what if you started a ministry that actually reached them through the games that they're playing? And the guy just responded by saying, nope, will never work. And it's just like, right. It's just like, it's a very thoughtless mentality, and it's very dismissive because it's foreign and it's threatening, right? I don't understand it. And there's this fear that if I acknowledge it, then I have to do it, and I don't want to do it. And I don't think it has as much to do with feeling like my people are being taken and going to your digital church as much as it has to do with, I don't personally like it, and it personally makes me uncomfortable, and I don't want to go through the process of thinking critically about whether or not it's legitimate. So I just dismiss it. I mean, it's just like the church has dismissed people who play video games for years. It's nothing new. I've been dismissed by the church forever for that reason. So it's not new territory. But I think the churches that are smart, like a lot of pastors who are smart and are willing to be open-minded a little bit, are exploring that. So like Elevation Church, Life Church just launched their first VR campus. Elevation now has a big streaming network. A lot of other churches are coming and saying, what are you doing? So for us, it's like we move with the movers. It's like, there's always going to be naysayers out there. When you're on the spear's tip, like there's always going to be more voices who dismiss you than voices who encourage you. And we've just said, well, we're going to listen to Jesus. We're going to listen to God. We're going to be in conversation with him. And then after that, we're going to listen to the people who are behind us. And the rest of you, like, you know, if you don't want to have a realistic conversation, it's like, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say it. It's like, go pound salt. That's fine. Like, don't come in and tell me to stop. You know,
absolutely.
We're reaching people and I'm happy.
I say we start a Twitter war right here. Hashtag pound salt or hashtag down with the organization. I want to switch gears real quick as we get to kind of our final couple questions. Give me like a blue sky 2 to 3 year. What does Lux look like in 2 to 3 years for you guys?
2 to 3 years, we're self-sustaining. I think that's the goal of any church plant. Our church plant doesn't look any different than what any other church plant does. If after our 1 year and 2 more years, at 3 years, like, we have grown up and our church has like put on their big boy pants and said, we believe in this thing. We're going to financially support this thing. That would be a huge win for us. I think if you asked me, where am I at in 10 years, right? Our long-term goal is to plant everything digital goes physical and everything physical goes digital. There's no person who's exclusively a physical being. If you're listening to this podcast, guess what? You're partially digital. I just happen to be more digital than the average person, right? And so for us, though, we also recognize that exclusively digital lives are wildly unhealthy. And so our goal, like a pastor who gets on stage and preaches a sermon, right? You hope that your people will apply that to their lives and they won't go home and act like a complete tool on Facebook, right? That's your hope. Because you hope that the physical transformation also transforms the way they interact digitally. Well, we hope the exact same thing. It's just flipped. We interact with people digitally And we hope that transforms the way they live physically. Because if you come to faith in Jesus, but then you're not compelled that your neighbor and your coworker and your friend and your family who don't know Jesus won't go to hell, then have you really decided to follow Jesus? Like, probably not.
Yeah.
And so we want to equip people to live out their life as missionaries actively. So our long-term goal is to plant a dispersed network globally of house churches. So like the ultimate end of our engagement pathway is a church planner. So you come into our church as a lurker, you leave our church trained as a missionary, equipped to reach the people in your context, to bring 10 to 12 people into your house for a Bible study. We equip you with a web of people all across the globe with digital resources that prepare you to disciple and pastor the people inside your church. And then you raise up church planners from within, train them as mercenaries, as missionaries, and then you release them. And we build a web that's connected digitally, but that has physical footprints. So, hey, hopefully in 10 years, when we gather to worship, there's a couple hundred nerds behind their computer screens. Absolutely. We'll leverage the power of the nerd. But hopefully there's also, a church in Moscow and 3 churches in South Africa and 5 churches in Missouri and 3 house churches in, Delaware and, 1 in Pittsburgh and 1 in LA. Hopefully we also have house churches that are building all over the place. That's our long-term vision.
I love it. That's awesome. Big and expansive. I'm going to go, last question from me. Top 5 games of all time, whether they board, video, whatever it is, mobile, top 5. Go 5 to 1 for me. I know it's a Sophie's choice because, like, even as I was writing the question to you in the email, I was going like, I don't know that I can narrow just 5 down. So if you want to give me a top 2 or 3, then I will. You and the rest of the army here will be forgiven.
Andy, the hard part about that question is the sheer amount of games that I've played.
I know, dude. I know.
It's not an easy question to answer. So we'll do at least 4, maybe 5.
Okay.
And let's go with genre. Let's do it by genre because it's just too hard. So I'm actually more of a tabletop gamer than I am a video gamer. I prefer tabletop gaming. So my favorite tabletop game, board game, for a long time has been a game called Blood Rage, which is about Ragnarok during the end of time in a Viking mythology. It's a phenomenal game. No one will play it with me anymore because I beat everybody at it. A close second is a game by Ryan Lockett and Red Raven Games called Near and Far, which is one of my wife and I's all-time top favorite games to play. If we went to tabletop RPGs, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs for 20 years. I've been playing with the same group. I'm playing with a guy tonight that I've been playing with since 6th grade, actually.
Dang. Did you guys switch over to 5th?
Yeah, so we're playing 5th right now.
Okay.
But we went during 4th edition, we went wide in different RPGs. So
Good.
one of my all-time favorite RPGs is a really brutal system called Burning Wheel.
Yeah.
A close second is a more collaborative storytelling model by Forged in the Dark, which is called Blades in the Dark. And it is
that was
really
Adventure
phenomenal.
Zone. If you guys ever listen to the Adventure Zone, they did Blades in the Dark for a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's this post-apocalyptic Victorian England setting. It's a really, really fun game. I actually have my characters that I played. I had artwork done. I commissioned artwork done of my characters that I played because I loved that game so much. If I had to choose a top video game of all time, and there are some really, really good games out there, I think that I would have to choose... Oh man, you know what? Like, it's hard for me not to choose Skyrim, only because of the obscene amount of hours I put into that game in college
and longevity. I mean, it's on every platform since the PS2. It feels like
it's been on every platform 3 times.
So yeah, re-release after re-release.
Yeah. So there's that, and if I had to pick a favorite card game, and this sort of bridges into video games. I played a lot of digital and physical tabletop card games. I'm currently really enjoying a game by Fantasy Flight called Marvel Champions. But I also podcasted and played Elder Scrolls Legends competitively for a while, and not real competitively, but slightly. And that was where my podcast started. It covered Tessel when I first got started. So that was one of my all-time favorite card games. I'm a big Elder Scrolls fanboy. I still play Elder Scrolls Online.
How do you feel? How do you feel about all the stuff about 6 coming out right now?
I guess I'm clueless. Did they release some new information about 6 as of late that I missed?
Well, all of the Reddit scuttlebutt says that some of the Microsoft takeover is actually pushing 6 back. And so the thing I've always, my brother and I were both, well, not my brother so much anymore, but I'm also I was an ESO guy for a while. And I started reading Reddit just for the lulz on 6, and then all of a sudden I went, oh crap, Microsoft, but oh my gosh, that's right, this thing's going to get ruined. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
I think that the acquisitions of Microsoft and Sony, because Sony just bought Bungie, and I'm a Destiny 2 player as well. I think that it's a power game. It's a movement. Nobody wants Elder Scrolls 6 to fail, including Microsoft.
Right.
And so if they're wise, they'll let the people with the greatest passion about the game and the biggest devotion to it continue to develop it. So I don't have any reason to, my hope is that Elder Scrolls 6 gets delayed only because before with Bethesda, they were running out of resources and we're going to have to push the game out partially made. And with Microsoft, they can push the release date back and actually polish the game because they have the financial resources to do so now. That's my hope. And, I've been waiting 11 years or whatever for that game. At this point, I'll just take Breath of the Wild 2. I'll just take Breath of the Wild 2 for now.
What's the other one they're doing? Starfield? Is that the other one they're doing?
Starfield. Yeah, I'm not a huge sci-fi guy. I've always just had a bigger attraction to fantasy games. So, I don't know how much I'll play Starfield, but supposedly that's going to come out this year. We'll see.
Sure.
Hopefully the NPCs actually have faces and stuff once it does come out.
Yeah, hope you can't. You just put books down and then they just launch into outer space after that. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Mark, thanks so much for this conversation, man. I appreciate we are going to have all of Mark's contact information, all of his social information, all of Lux's socials, everything, all the links are going to be in the show notes for this and in the description below. Super stoked for what you guys are doing. Love being able to catch up with you, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on the show, Andy.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again to Mark and Lux Digital Church and everything that they're doing. I after that, I jumped right into their Discord and was hanging out with everybody and have been hanging out with everybody. I am a huge proponent of what they do on Wednesday nights, but not only that, of what they're doing with their small groups, with their entire model of how they're doing discipleship. And it's interesting to see, some of what the conversation unraveled around and really rolled back up on was how digital churches and how digital church ministry is so much different and yet almost the same as in-person physical ministry. And I'm just excited to see how they're going about ministry. I'm excited to see what they're going to be doing. And most importantly, I'm excited to see the content that they're putting out because it is good content. It's not your standard, typical run-of-the-mill, look at a camera for 45 minutes and preach. There is worship and it is introspective and there are announcements and there's a live prayer time and there's interaction happening between the camera and the Discord. And there's, what I like to call chucklehead time at the very beginning with him and his wife or him and a partner or him and a brother-in-law or whoever's in town as they just sit on the couch and talk. And I love the laid-back, relaxed atmosphere of everything happening there. So Mark, thanks, man. Thanks for joining us here. And to you listening, thanks for joining me here on Breaking the Fifth Wall. This is, like I said, episode 2. We've got a lot more coming. We've got live shows coming. We've got YouTube shows coming, a whole bunch of stuff. So stay tuned to this channel. Stay tuned to our socials. Until then, love you. Talk soon.